they went around they went around asking young people from kindergarten the kinds of questions that they always wanted to ask people, but never had gotten any answer to.
Mm-hmm.
And then the twist was that they went and asked these questions to acknowledge experts from these fields. So a Nobel Prize winning physicist might be explaining an answer asked by a 3-year-old. And that's the
Okay.
book. Magnificent
Wow.
book. Because young
Huh.
people are not afraid to ask very basic questions, and super bright people are not afraid to answer them. So it made for a fantastic read.
Lovely.
So who knows, if we get good enough questions and are able to answer them well enough, all of us together could co-author a book on this call. Fingers crossed.
Oh, that will be great. Yeah. Thank you. I'm seeing Jagat has said hi. Nahid has also said hi, and he's not able to switch on his video. No issues, Nahid. Um, and there's a question, an introduction from Arina Ghosh and from Matthew Tony. Matthew, thank you for giving us some questions. Why is water wet? Why is fire sometimes blue but never purple? What exactly is this session about? Okay, here are some examples of questions. People, please,
Absolutely.
questions.
Of which I can answer the first one immediately and very well. The other two I myself am not so sure about because I'm an economist and not a scientist. Except I think I can kind of answer the
Why are there so many
second one.
Kulkarnis in the world? Yeah, it's
What a
Ashish.
lovely question.
Another question right up your alley over there.
Yes. So, Mahit, actually, the answer to your question depends upon which part of the world you are from. But at least the part of the world that I come from, which is Pune, yes, you're right. Kulkarni is an extremely popular surname. And I'm very unlucky because Ashish is a very popular name. So, I myself know about 6 or 7 different Ashish Kulkarnis. And so, yes, you're right. It is a very, very, very popular name. Why is your name Jagat? Well, the easy answer to that question is your name is Jagat because your parents would have named you Jagat. But why your parents named you Jagat is a much more interesting story. And I'm quite curious by now. So, Jagat, if you can tell us why your name is Jagat.
Also, just I'll just quickly put in a
I don't know.
reminder for everyone who's just joined. Sorry, go ahead, Jagat.
No, I don't know. I just made one random question. I didn't know why was my name
Lovely,
Jagat
lovely.
also. I just
Great. So
No
some of
problem.
these questions are things that you'll have to figure out the answer to, and that sounds like one of them. So I'll just greet the other people who've joined us in just now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Siddharth Bharat. I'm with the Gifted World community. I'm one of the community managers. Thank you for joining today. We're just waiting a few more minutes as people are trickling in. With us is Dr. Ashish Kulkarni, the speaker for today. And he has a small request for everyone who's joining in. If you can, so 2 things. First, if you can, please turn on your video. It's lovely to see so many excited faces. And we'd love to see all of you and what you're doing and your reactions as we're starting off this event. Request number 2, if you could open the chat box, tell us your name, where you are calling from, and any random questions that you want. Just as an example, I will share questions that we have already received today. So why is water wet? Why is fire sometimes blue but never purple? One question that Ashish personally said that he really has enjoyed from a past meeting is melody itni chocolatey kyun hai? So any random question, it doesn't have to be related to the topic for today. Please send in your questions on the chat along with your introduction, and we will get started in just a few minutes.
These are lovely questions. I'm having a ball. In fact, I'm tempted to change the session around and just answer these questions. But don't worry, Siddha, that's only a joke.
No, we're happy wherever the session goes. I think it'll be great if you could. I'm sure you could make many of these relate to economics.
Some of them, yes. So, Ausnik, you might be interested in this, but Bertrand Russell had a lovely essay in which he tries to explain how to explain the number 3. What is the number 3? Let alone the answer to your question, why is 1 plus 1 2? But try and explain what we mean when we say the number 3. The challenge, of course, is you must explain it without using the concept 3. So you can't say 3 fingers, therefore 3, because then you're using the idea of 3 to explain what 3 is.
Yeah.
I'll try and answer some of these as we go along, and while we're waiting for everybody to join.
Sure, Ashish, please do.
So, why can humans feel emotions? It's a lovely question, Anisha, and I would argue that one of the definitions of human beings is the fact that we can feel emotions. The answer actually, by the way, comes from a very famous economist. His name is Adam Smith. Some people say that he's the inventor of modern economics, but he's got a book. Most people know one of the books he's written is called The Wealth of Nations, but he's got another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and in which he says that one of the things that defines us is the fact that we're able to feel pain and emotions, even more interestingly, for other people. So if one of you feel pain or show anguish, then all of us on the call will also feel pain and therefore feel emotional. So why is it that humans feel emotion? One answer is that's what makes us human.
Thank you so much. That was a very profound answer.
Thank you. Raghav asks, is the earth flat? Again, I'm not a scientist, but I would argue that we know for sure by now that the earth isn't flat, right?
I see there's a question of why
What
do we
is...
grow taller as we get older?
Yes, Shreya from Bangalore asks this question. You might ask yourself if it would be better if we did not get taller. Would that mean that we would stay alive for longer? Is a worthwhile question to ask. And you might think that the answer might perhaps be yes, but I would argue probably not. Part of what makes us taller is what makes us older as well.
And then there's the
Why
other
do...
question of,
Thank
do
you. That
you
was
grow
a
taller
good,
when you
thoughtful
get
answer.
older?
I'm sorry?
I couldn't see who unmuted. Would you?
That was Shreya.
Oh, hi, Shreya. Tell us more.
Hi, Shreya. Hi, Klavya. I don't know if you've seen the list of questions that the students have asked.
Yes, I have just joined in and I'm looking through that itself.
Yes, and
This
my
is
hands are
my
full in today's class.
this is and it's going to be all very exciting.
Okay,
I look
great.
forward to listening to these answers.
Do God and ghost exist? Well, in
And
movies, they most certainly do.
so another quick reminder to turn on your videos. I'm purposely not sharing my screen so that we can all see each other. And it really makes a big difference. This is the Gifted World community after all. Our goal is to gather like this again and again, see each other, make friends, and hear from amazing people, learn a lot as well. So welcome everyone. Please do switch on your videos if you're able to. And as we've asked for earlier, please share random questions in the chat. We will start in just another minute as we're waiting for people to sign in.
Nahid asks, what's the meaning of consciousness? What a lovely question. The ability to ask this question perhaps is the meaning of consciousness. Anusha asks, who are economists? I hope by the end of this call, Anusha, you'll agree with my answer. My answer is economists are fun people. But we'll see if I'm able to live up to that claim, and I'm able to convince you that us economists also are capable of being fun every now and then.
I'm looking forward to it.
We'll find out. Also, I saw a note from Sejo earlier on saying that she comes from Gurgaon. How cold is it today, Sejo? Are you able to listen without shivering?
It is comparatively better from the last 2-3 days, but the 2-3 days were like we could not get out of the bed. It was
Blankets,
very
right. So cold, in fact, that it becomes a challenge to do anything, even at home, right?
Yes, yes.
You should keep a note of the questions. What is the meaning of common sense? Jagat, I agree. In fact, if anything, it's painfully rare common sense. So perhaps we are not calling it the correct name.
No, not that.
Is there any surface below the planets in the universe? Kiran, there's an entire book about this. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is one of the first or earliest science fiction books, and it's a wonderful book to read about the answer to the question about whether there is a surface below the planet. Aditi, you ask a lovely, lovely question. Why is world peace so hard to achieve? Believe it or not, economists actually have an answer to this question. World peace is so hard to achieve because of a concept from economics called game theory. And unfortunately, we don't have the time to explain today how game theory helps you understand why there is a lack of world peace. But it is one of the topics that we'll definitely be covering in the extended course on economics at the GenWise program. Chris asks, what is so far my favorite question? Why are human beings so smart and so dumb at the same time? Trust me, Krish, I wish not just me, but a lot of adults knew the answer to this question. Life would be so much better. Our country is really needed. Wow. In an ideal world, my personal answer to this question is no, they are not. But then again, the existence of countries gives us a sense of belonging that is otherwise very difficult to construct for the world. So yes, sometimes the existence of countries can cause problems, but on the other hand, the existence of countries can also cause a whole host of good things. The trick is to strike that balance, and not always do we succeed. Should everyone read at least once in their... Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Siddharth, if I'm interrupting, please let me know whenever you're...
No issues. I just saw that Yashwant has his hand up.
Yes, Yashwant.
Yashwant?
I have a question.
Sure,
Sure.
do tell us,
Why,
Yashwant.
why are we spending money in space when we have so many problems here on Earth?
It's a wonderful question that actually uses an economic principle called opportunity cost, which means everything that you do isn't for free. You could have done something else with your time. So Yashwant, instead of asking this question, you could have done something else. The opportunity cost of asking this question is you couldn't do something else. And so by that logic, sure, if there are lots of problems on Earth, then why do we need to solve problems in space? But also, then you can ask the same question about all the problems on Earth. Which is the most important problem to solve?
Okay, so I'm going to take this moment to step in and get the session started. So thank you everyone for your enthusiastic participation in the chat box. I think Ashish would love you to continue putting questions in there as this session goes on. I'll just give a brief introduction and then hand it over to Ashish for the rest of the session. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Siddharth Bharat. I'm one of the community managers of Gifted World, the Gifted World community. Welcome to the very first event of the Gifted World community. We are a new platform that exists to help make an easy community, a learning community for parents, teachers, and gifted students from around the world. We are started by some really great founding partners, and we have a really exciting series of events coming up for you in the next few weeks. So I'm just going to share my screen so that all of you have registered on our website, but I just wanted to show it to you once more in case you haven't. There we go. Oops. And now my computer is doing something funny. There we go. Right. So today we have a session by Ashish Kulkarni, and I will tell you more about him in a bit. On the Gifted World website, if you haven't already registered, please do register. There's a button on the top right, which when you click on, you get the option to sign in. Members who are a part of this community get access to a lot of very detailed blogs that we're starting to post, and detailed content for opportunities and learnings for gifted students and education. And I just want to draw your attention to some of our upcoming events. Next Saturday, 1 week from now, we have a session on unleashing the power of ChatGPT. This is a session by Naveen Kabra, a CTO of a company, who is running this class about how to make AI your friend. So this is available to members only. Please register and get your free for this masterclass. On the same day, in the evening next Saturday, we're having a session on that is mostly oriented towards parents on the journeys of 3 gifted students told from their point of view. So 2 young adults and a teenager who have been a part of the mentoring that comes from the Gifted World partners will share about how they have made their journey through life and what an impact was made by the various resources that they had along the way. I also want to make a plug for after these 2 events happen, there is, sorry, I've lost, there we go. Yeah. Later, we also have an event in February by Dr. Bhushan Shukla, who is an eminent psychologist on parenting for talent development. So go to www.giftedworld.org, become a member, sign in, and take a look at all these exciting events that we have. That's enough of that. And now I will move to today's event. So what does the world look like to an economist? This is a masterclass being hosted by Dr. Ashish Kulkarni, who runs a blog called Econ for Everybody. You can just go to this website, www.econforeverybody.com. Now, Ashish has had a rich and varied career, including teaching economics at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economy in Pune, and also working on business planning for companies as large as Suzlon. Now, I see some people are trying to annotate on the screen. I'll disable that in a bit. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, sorry about that. Ashish is one of the mentors at the Gifted Summer Program run by GenWise in Manipal. So today is just a short teaser of the kinds of things you will learn if you come to Manipal and take Ashish's course there. I'll say more about that at the end of the session, but now I'd like to stop my screen share and hand over the session to Ashish.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Siddharth. And hi, everybody. As Siddharth mentioned, my name is Ashish Kulkarni. And if it's possible for you, you don't have to, but I would much prefer to be known as Ashish. So please call me Ashish and address all your questions by calling me Ashish. I'll also tell you the reason why I think it's important that you get to call me Ashish rather than Dr. Kulkarni or Ashish sir. It's because it becomes easier to say Ashish, you're wrong, than to say, sir, you're wrong. And I do hope some of you think that some of the things that I'm telling you today might be things that you disagree with. Because the best way to learn is through arguments and by asking questions. So your job is not just to listen. Your job, much more importantly, is to ask questions. I don't need to tell you this because you've asked such insanely good questions that I'm going to be awake half of the night tonight trying to think of what the answer is to some of them. But as we talk about economics as well, please go ahead and ask as many questions as you want. So my job today is to explain to you how us economists think about 2 different things. One is what is known as microeconomics, and the other is what is known as macroeconomics, M-A-C-R-O, macroeconomics. That sounds like a big word, macroeconomics, but it really is the answer to 3 very simple questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about what these 3 questions are, explain why these 3 questions matter so much, and then in today's call, we're going to take a look at the answer to the first of these 3 questions. So, are you ready? The 3 big picture questions in macroeconomics. What is macroeconomics all about? The 3 big picture questions about macroeconomics are: 1, what does the world look like? 2, why does the world look the way it does? And 3, what can we do to make the world a better place? Now, most of us economists think that the most important question is the third one. What can we do to make the world a better place? And while that is not the focus of today's talk, let's begin by thinking about how difficult a question this is to answer. What is the third question? What can we do to make the world a better place? Now, the trouble with this is two small simple words in this question. The first is we, and the second is better. Who is we? That is, who gets to decide what makes the world a better place? Is it our government? Which form of government? Is it all governments put together? Can China be able to answer the question, what makes the world a better place for India? Is India going to be able to answer the question, what makes the world a better place for Europe? So who is we becomes a tricky question. And the second question, the second word that makes the third question a very tricky one is better. So Siddharth was telling me before the call started that he is an ecologist by training. I'm an economist by training. I guarantee you that both Siddharth and I will have different answers to the question, what makes the world a better place? That doesn't mean that his answer is correct and mine is wrong, or mine is correct and his is wrong. We just have different ways of looking at the world. I might say, for example, that, hey, industrialization is really important. And Siddharth, on the other hand, might say, hey, industrialization causes pollution. And both of us are right. Industrialization is necessary, but also at the same point of time, it causes a whole host of problems. So then whose answer is correct? Is Siddharth's answer correct or is my answer correct? Or are both of our answers correct and we need to figure out how to make both of our answers suitable for the world? So as it turns out, the answer to the question, how can we make the world a better place, is a very, very, very tricky question to both frame and answer. The second question is, why does the world look the way it does? So for example, all of us know that Singapore is a richer country than India is, not in terms of the size of its economy, but in terms of the wealth that each person has access to in Singapore, vis-a-vis the wealth that each person has access to in India. Singapore is much better. But why? What has made Singapore richer over time? Now, some of you might say, hey, maybe India is poor because India was ruled by the British for nearly 200 years. But so was Singapore. But as it turns out, Singapore was able to overcome this problem far faster than India was. Why? Might weather have something to do with it? Might the number of people in this country have something to do with it? Some of you might say, hey, it's because India has so many people. But then by that logic, China ought to be poorer than us. Right? So there are lots of different factors that go into answering the question, why does the world look the way it does? But even before we answer that question, why does the world look the way it does? We first need to answer the question that is the title of today's talk. What does the world look like to an economist? Now, what does the world look like to a geographer? That's the globe that all of us have studied in school. Right? So to a geographer, the world looks like the map of the world. What does the world look like to, say, for example, an epidemiologist? An epidemiologist might not even see or note the fact that there are humans on this world. First off, an epidemiologist might in fact want to take a look at the world at the level of, say, for example, viruses. And some of you might think, what a weird thing to do. But all of us should be grateful that epidemiologists look at the world the way they do, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of us, scientists and social scientists, we have different ways of looking at the world. The way us economists look at the world is in the following fashion. This is how we look at the world. Before I proceed, I want to make sure that the screen that I've just shared is visible to everybody. Anybody who's not able
Yes,
to
it's
see,
visible.
please let me know.
Yes, it's
Excellent.
visible.
All right. I got a lot of thumbs up. So lovely.
It's visible.
This is what the world looks like.
It's visible.
Well, this is what the world looks like, minus that yellow squiggle. We'll figure out how to remove that yellow squiggle soon. Lots of yellow squiggles. But this is what the world looks like to an economist. So what do I mean when I say this is what the world looks like to an economist? If you look at the right top of my screen, this looks somewhat familiar, right? This multicolored map. That, of course, is a map of the world. What is this map of the world? What this map of the world shows us is different countries or different regions in the world marked out in different colors. So North and South America are marked out in green. So all the countries that belong to North and South America are the green bubbles. All the countries in Africa are light blue in color. All the countries in Europe are yellow in color. And all the countries in Australia and Asia are red in color. In fact, if I were to hover over, say for example, Asia, then I will see all the red bubbles blinking over time. If I were to hover over Europe, then I will see all the yellow bubbles hovering on my screen. Swarnim, would you mind removing the annotations, please? It becomes a little difficult to explain the countries as we're going along. I think it was Swarnim who's, yes, thank you so much. So we have different countries being shown as different bubbles. What do these bubbles mean? That is, why are these bubbles of different colors? First question. And second, why are these bubbles of different sizes? I've already explained why these bubbles are of different colors. The colors indicate where in the world these countries are located. So what about the different sizes? Well, the size of the bubble is the population of the country. So for example, you can immediately identify India and China, right? The largest red colored bubbles, they must be India and China. So we've answered two questions about the countries on the screen. The first question that we've answered is, what is the size of the bubble indicating? Well, it's indicating the populations of the countries. And what is the color of the bubble indicating? It is indicating where in the world these countries are located. Now, the next question that we have to ask is, why are these countries located at different points on the screen? The reason they're located at different points on the screen is because of what is located on the y-axis and what is being shown on the x-axis. So what is being shown on the vertical axis? What we're looking at on the vertical axis is life expectancy. What that means is, on average, what is the life expectancy of the citizens in different countries? In some countries, it might be 10, which I hope doesn't happen for any country today, but it's a really low life expectancy. For some countries, it might be 20, for others, it might be 30, 40, so on and so forth. Those are the numbers on the vertical axis. Simple, life expectancy. And what is on the horizontal axis? On the horizontal axis, we have GDP per capita. Now, GDP is technically speaking, an economist's term. But I think all of you have an intuitive understanding of what GDP is. GDP is the money earned by a nation in 1 year. So all of India put together, if we count the incomes earned by me, by Eklavya, by Siddharth, by everybody, every single adult in this country, if we count up all of their incomes, then we get India's GDP per year. And so what we have over here is each country's GDP divided by the number of people who are in that country. That's what GDP per capita means. The income earned by a nation divided by the number of people in that nation. So it shows us on average how rich is each individual in a country. Couple of things that I need to very quickly explain about the horizontal axis. And what I need to explain is the fact that I think all of you can see towards the right bottom of your screens that this is price and inflation adjusted data. Now, what does price and inflation adjusted data mean? Inflation adjusted data is very simply explained. I'm sure your parents and your grandparents have bored you to death by stories about how when they were in school and college, say for example, a dosa used to cost only 1 rupee or 10 rupees or whatever it may be. And these days, dosas have become so expensive. Right? All of us have heard stories about how prices were cheaper earlier and how prices are a lot more expensive today. Quantifying this is inflation adjustment. I'll give you, in fact, a story from my own life. When I started working, this was in the year 2006, my starting salary was 30,000 rupees per month. And my dad, when he started working in the early 1970s, his starting salary was 300 rupees per month. Am I 100 times better than my dad? I
No.
like Riyansh's answer the best. As soon as I finished asking the question, he started moving his hand and saying, no, of course I'm not 100 times better than my dad. And he's right, of course I'm not 100 times better than my dad. What had happened was the fact that the rupee had become much weaker in terms of its ability to purchase stuff by the time I started working. That's what we call inflation. Measuring this is what inflation is, and this data has inflation removed from it. Statisticians have done their magic and they have allowed us to compare prices over time. Okay. The second thing that I need to explain is in fact slightly more tricky. I don't know if you can see the term PPP 2017 towards the right bottom. If you squint your eyes and look very carefully at the lower right bottom of the screen, you should be able to see price and inflation adjusted in PPP dollars 2017.
Can I answer about that?
Sure, please.
So, like I have done a bit of research on PPP,
Mhm.
which is the purchasing power parity. So,
Absolutely.
let's say I can purchase a Big Mac in India for 100 rupees. So that will be, let's say, around $1. But if I go to the US, it will cost me 400 rupees. But
Yep.
for the people living in US, it will be equal to 100 rupees. It will feel to them like 100 rupees because they're earning that much. So
Correct.
so the power that you have with the money is different in nations.
Absolutely. So Ayan not only answer the question correctly, but you also use the most famous example there is of purchasing power parity, which is what is known as a Big Mac index. But not that Ayan's explanation is in any way incorrect. It is not. It's a fantastic explanation. But I'm going to repeat it by giving you an even more weird example. And this is an example that I actually have very little expertise in. Okay. I'm going to talk about haircuts. If you can see me on your screen, you know that I have no moral right to talk about haircuts because I no longer require them. But Ayan, on the other hand, clearly requires haircuts. So, what about haircuts? Now, if I were to walk into an Indian barber shop, even me, okay, with the amount of hair on my head, if I were to walk into an Indian barber shop and I were to say to that guy, cut my hair, the first question the barber is going to ask is, what hair? But after he gets over the shock of a bald man asking him for a haircut, he will charge me around 100 rupees for that haircut. Might be slightly higher, might be slightly lower, but approximately 100 rupees. But even if I were to walk into an American barber shop and say to the American barber, hey, cut the hair on my head, I would be charged about $20 for it. If you do the math, $20 is approximately 1500 rupees. So, same service, just moving some scissors over the hair on my head cost 100 rupees in India, costs 1500 rupees in America. Now, it is true that $1 is equal to 80 rupees, but, and this is the important part, but it turns out $1 in America buys you lesser than does 80 rupees in India. The purchasing power of 80 rupees in India is much more than the purchasing power of $1 in America. Does this make sense to everybody? $1 doesn't buy you as many things in America as can 80 rupees in India. The purchasing power of 80 rupees is much more than the purchasing power of $1. So exchange rate is $1 is equal to 80 rupees, but 80 rupees is much more powerful than is $1.
Excuse
So
me.
yes, please go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I had a question. This
Yes,
is one
Riyansh.
question I've had for like many years from now.
Okay.
How do we know value of money? Like, how do we know $1 is $1 and 1 rupee is 1 rupee?
Excellent question. And one way to answer this question is by thinking about inflation. So we measure the purchasing power by saying, let's think about a basket of goods. So Riyansh, let's think about, say, for example, a bottle of shampoo. Let's think about a kilo of wheat. Let's think about a toothpaste. Let's think about 1 kilo of salt. A typical collection of things that a family will purchase. And then, Riyansh, you can ask the question, what does it cost to purchase this basket of goods? If you need more and more rupees to buy the same basket of goods, then the purchasing power of the rupee is going down over time. And that is one way to answer the question, how much is a rupee worth? Riyansh, does that make sense? Yeah, cool. And so, by the way, not just Riyansh, all of you, please feel free to ask questions. What I would recommend is that you please raise your hand and I'll stop every now and then to answer questions. But let me first finish explaining what is on the screen. Then I'm going to pause for a while and try and answer as many questions as I can. So let's get back to the screen. So now we know what is price adjusted data, what is inflation adjusted data, and what is purchasing power parity. Basically, what we are measuring is the same thing, GDP per capita, expressed in dollars for all of these nations. But there's one final thing that you should note about the horizontal axis. The numbers are weird. And I mean that quite seriously. They really are weird. If you look at the vertical axis, 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 30, 30 becomes 40. This is easy. But look at the horizontal axis. It seems the people who designed this software have gone mad. Why do I say they've gone mad? Because 500 doesn't become 1000 and 1000 doesn't become 500. Instead, 500 becomes 1000, but then 1000 becomes 2000. 2000 becomes 4000. 4000 becomes 8000. And very quickly we realize that each movement to the right is actually a doubling. This is what is known as logarithmic data. And the reason we do it is because if we had not done this, my screen would have needed to be bigger than India's width. Having to fit all the countries on one screen means that we need to use a weird kind of data set or a weird kind of adjustment known as logarithmic data. You don't need to worry about logarithms. I promise this is not a class on mathematics. So if some of you started to feel afraid as soon as I use the word logarithm, forget all about it. Just remember the fact that the numbers on the horizontal axis are weird. Each movement on the right is a doubling. That's good enough for us. But all right, enough about talking about vertical and horizontal axes. Now let's actually take a look at the countries. Let's take a look at the very first country that we're going to speak about today. And I'm going to make that the very tiny country of Luxembourg. So tiny, in fact, that some of you might struggle to see that little yellow bubble on your screens. That's because the population of Luxembourg is so tiny. But hey, Luxembourg is one of the richest countries in the world. It has, on average, an income of $116,000 per person per year. That's a lot of money. I can see Anisha going, wow, and I agree with her. It's a lot of money for a very tiny country. But the good news is, the people who live in this country don't just earn a lot of money, they also are able to live for a very long period of time. Can any one of you tell me the life expectancy of the citizens of Luxembourg?
83.4 years.
83.
Correct. Absolutely. So
The
both Spurs
quality
and
of life is
Austek, I
better
think,
there.
absolutely. The quality of life is also better, although that is not something we are measuring on this particular chart. But hey, rich people seem to be able to live for longer. Why do I say that? I say that because there is no country lying at the right bottom and there is no country lying at the left top. Can you see this? If countries are poor, they seem to have low life expectancy. If countries are rich, that means if they're towards the right, they seem to have high life expectancy.
Sir,
This,
I
by the way, is
disagree on this point.
okay. Can you tell me why, Hitin?
Sir, as on the very left side, there is
Yeah.
a country with a higher expectancy rate than a country which is on the third right.
Yeah.
Let me annotate. So, for the, 1 minute. For this country, for a minute, sorry,
Yeah, that's fine. That's
is
fine.
has a higher life expectancy than this country.
Correct. Absolutely. So excellent point raised by Hitin.
That's why I am saying
Yeah.
I disagree on this.
I think I can answer that question.
Okay.
See, it depends upon the way you live. Like if you eat healthy foods, you sleep by 7 and eat by 7. It depends upon the way you live and also the money you have.
Absolutely. I couldn't
Okay.
have explained it better myself. But that being said, let me add to what I think it was Agastya who answered this question. Let me add to what he said.
Yeah.
Do all tall players necessarily become basketball players?
No.
No. They should
Exactly.
have
Here the
also other
correlation
skills.
does not equal causation.
Causation. There are poor countries that might do surprisingly well on health, and similarly, there are rich countries that might do surprisingly poorly on health. But in general, as a thumb rule, we can say that rich countries on average tend to do better than poor countries. What Hitin was pointing out is that this is not necessarily universally true, but as a simple rule, the more you are towards the right, the more likely it is that you'll be towards the top.
Like
And you can say this the
there's always exceptions for everything.
correct. And there are often exceptions that prove the rule. Absolutely. All right. So we have a thumb rule, but as Hiten quite correctly pointed out, this thumb rule doesn't necessarily mean it's 100% accurate. But in general, the richer you are, the higher the life expectancy you can expect. So
Sir,
having take, yeah, yes, Vihan.
sir, richer countries have more life expectancy because they are easily accessible to healthcare services, and also to they are easily accessible to resources, as they have a more civilized country than the poor ones on average.
Fantastic. Some of you seem to be more capable than me of conducting this session. So maybe the next time around, I will listen and you guys can explain to me how Gapminder works. And I mean that quite seriously. All your explanations are making my job easier. So in terms of, sorry.
So we can visit a lot of countries here. Like the green bubble, the larger
Mhm.
green bubble can be USA. The
Yes,
two
it is
bubbles,
USA, you're right.
yeah. The
But
one at the
now,
most top can be Japan because it has
yes,
the highest life expectancy.
this is Singapore, this is Japan.
Yeah.
But we'll come to the other countries. For now, I want to go to one of the poorest countries. We can either take a look at South Sudan or we can take a look at the Central African Republic. Because I want to emphasize life expectancy, let's take a look at the Central African Republic. Now, the Central African Republic has, on average, $819 in terms of GDP per capita. It's so difficult to explain what this means in practice, but here's one way to think of it. The citizens of Luxembourg are about 116 times as rich as the citizens of the Central African Republic. Remember, the citizens of Luxembourg can earn $116,000 per person. The citizens of the Central African Republic earn less than $1,000 per person. So how much is the difference in terms of income earning capability? 116 times. If you meet somebody who's twice as tall as you, that's a problem. Imagine meeting somebody who's 116 times as tall as you. My camera isn't big enough to show me to show you guys how different the heights can be. Right, Riyansh is also trying along with me. That's the kind of difference that we're talking about, but that's the kind of inequality that exists on our planet. So by the way, we've already started to answer one part of our question. It turns out countries in Africa in general don't just have lower incomes, they also have lower life expectancy. And that's the bigger problem with low income. It's not just the fact that the citizens of Central African Republic are poor, that poverty causes expectant mothers to not get the kind of nutrition that they should, causes young infants to not get the kind of medicines or vaccines that they should, causes the citizens of the Central African Republic to not get the kind of education that they should. And for these reasons and so many other factors, it turns out the average life expectancy of the citizens of the Central African Republic is only 53. The lottery
Sir,
of birth makes you not just poor if you're not born in Luxembourg, it also robs you of years of your life.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
Sir, so like, can we? So how will the countries do the inflation process if they already are in poverty?
they don't do the inflation process, they measure the inflation process. Nobody does the inflation process. What we do when we measure inflation is we try and find out, is the purchasing power of the currency going down over time. In fact, I think your name is Virinchi, if I'm not mistaken. The
Yes.
answer to your question, Virinchi, is the fact that inflation actually ends up becoming an even bigger problem for poorer people. One simple way to understand this is, say for example, wherever you are staying, you'll have a watchman in your society.
Yes.
Yeah. So you and your family will eat on average 2 to 3 chapatis per day. Your watchman will also eat 2 to 3 chapatis per day. But if the price of wheat goes up, it will be a problem for your family. It will be a crisis for the family of the watchman. So as it turns out, inflation actually has a bigger impact on poorer people. So the poorer you are as a country, the bigger a problem inflation is. But to come back to the Central African Republic, the point that I want to make is the Central African Republic is very far from the country of Luxembourg, not just geographically, but also from the point of view of life expectancy and from the point of view of GDP per capita. So if you were to
sir,
ask me, how does an
Sir,
economist, just one second, how does an economist look at the world? This is how an economist look at the world. Now I see 8 people with raised hands, 9 in fact now. I will answer
Sir?
all the questions, but just give me a couple of minutes, please. Take a look at India. India lies somewhere in the middle. What is India's income per person? 7,100. What is India's life expectancy? 71.5. Should we be happy about the fact that we are richer and healthier than the Central African Republic? Or
Yes,
should we
sir.
be unhappy about the fact that we are poorer in terms of life expectancy and income than Luxembourg? What
You should
matters
be
more?
unhappy.
So some of you might think we should be happy, some of you think we should be unhappy, and economists should tell you both answers are correct. We should celebrate the fact that we've done relatively well, but we should also be mindful of the fact that we have many more miles to go before we can call ourselves a developed nation. Now,
Sir?
I'm painfully aware of the fact that a lot of people have a lot of questions, but, and I know I'm making you wait for a very long time, I will answer all 9 raised hands, I promise. But for the moment, let me show you what makes Gapminder so unbelievably cool. So what makes it so cool is the fact that the size of the bubble tells us a population, the color of the bubble tells us where in the world this country is located, the height of the bubble tells us a life expectancy, the width of the bubble from the origin tells us the GDP per capita. So one chart is telling us 4 things: population, location, GDP per capita, and life expectancy. This is what makes Gapminder cool. What makes Gapminder awesome is this. We just watched a movie of the world. When the movie of the world started, only Europe and North America were relatively rich countries. Asia and Africa were very poor. But as the world started to move ahead in time, as we reached the end of the 19th century, we see that slowly but surely Asian and African nations started to get a little bit richer. Then, in the 20th century, we had the First World War and the Spanish flu. Then we had the Great Depression. Then we had the Second World War. And then, at last, with the end of colonialism and imperialism, we can see how African and Asian nations very quickly start to get very rich. And what we are looking at is a process of the world as a whole growing richer over time. The question that us economists ask is, what were the factors that caused the rich countries to grow richer? Can we have those factors be applied to the poor countries in the world today so that next time when I take this class 50 years down the line, well, I might not be around 50 years from now, but whoever takes this class 50 years down the line, they are able to show that, hey, African nations also eventually caught up with the rest of the world and the entire world became a rich and healthy place. How to make this happen is what economics is all about. So my own answer to the question, what does the world look like to an economist? This is what the world looks like to an economist. Now, I know a lot of people wait for a very long time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer these questions. But rather than try and figure out whose questions I should be answering first, I will let Siddharth play dictator. And whoever Siddharth says gets to go first is a person who gets to ask the question. My job to answer them. Siddharth, over to you.
Okay, great. So, quick request. If you are able to type out your question, please type it out in the chat. That way we will be able to get to it faster. I'll be able to combine multiple people's questions together. To start off with, I think, Aditi, you've been having your hand up for a while.
I just wanted to say something about a poor country, like how poor countries work. Like, poor countries, like they have less life expectancy because they are have less health care. No, I felt like we can donate some money to poor countries like that. Everyone can donate, all the countries, and we can make them richer and bring a more balanced economy like that. That might cause a financial crisis to our country. No, I mean like not that much money, but like enough money that we can give to them to make them better. Like everyone giving money,
But in
like not
smaller
that much.
quantities, that is
See,
what
like
IMF is.
everybody's money
Okay,
combined
so
can make a huge amount.
okay,
Yeah, that's what
thank
I'm
you,
saying.
thank you
Excellent
all,
point.
thank you all for
Excellent points. Yeah.
yeah.
So I think both Siddharth and I were slightly nervous about the fact that we will have a battle of wits in terms of the discussion, which is awesome, and I hope we can get some time for it. But let me try and both agree with Aditi's question and explain to you why just transferring money might not work. So, Aditi, I agree with you. One thing that we need to do is provide aid to poor countries. And in fact, a lot of relatively rich countries are trying to figure out how to give aid to poorer nations. But at the same time, just giving that aid by and of itself doesn't solve any problems. Let me explain to you what I mean. Aditi, if you look at me and you say, hey, you know what, Ashish, you seem fine, but perhaps you can be a little bit healthier. And you, Aditi, decide to gift me a gym membership, which trust me is a good idea. Given my health, I could do with membership to a gym. My problem, however, is not the fact that I don't have enough money to attend a gym. My problem is I don't have enough enthusiasm to go to the gym. I don't have enough capability, as it turns out, to go to the gym. So often, building the capacity of the people in the poor nation to be able to utilize these funds well enough is often a bigger challenge. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying giving aid is pointless. There is a lot of point to giving aid, but we also at the same point of time need to develop what is known as state capacity. Poor countries should also have the capacity to utilize these funds well.
You have to teach the person how to fish.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
I'm going to
Yeah.
I'll just pull together a couple of questions that have come in so that we can
Yes.
ask it to Ashish in one go.
Sure.
So there are a bunch of questions about inflation. People are very curious about it. So
Okay.
how does inflation happen? Is it possible to reverse it? And then there's also a specific question of, does dollarization slow down inflation? So Ashish, if you'd like to
Wow.
take a few minutes to discuss about inflation.
Okay, so dollarization is a fairly advanced topic. I'll try and answer that question, but let me first begin with an explanation of what inflation is. So, all of you, Siddharth has told you about the test that we're going to have at the end of the session, right? That's a joke. There is no test at the end of this session, so please don't worry. I just wanted to see the slightly panicked faces of everybody when I mentioned the word test. But relax, I was just a joke. There are no exams, there are no marks. But imagine that there was an examination at the end of today's session. Okay? And also imagine that I didn't even bother correcting everybody's answer papers. I just gave everybody 100 on 100. So Jagat gets 100 on 100, Arina gets 100 on 100, Anusha gets 100 on 100. Every single student gets 100 on 100. So to begin with, you might feel happy, yeah, I got 100. But then very quickly you begin to realize it doesn't really mean much if everybody has gotten 100. How do we know who's a good student and who's a bad student? How do we know who prepared well and who did not? Turns out, if I distribute marks like there's no tomorrow, the value of those marks goes down. Similarly, if countries distribute money like there's no tomorrow, the value of that money goes down over time. So inflation is a way to check the value of the marks that you've been given. And by the way, some of you might want to run a Google search for a term called grade inflation. As it turns out, we have been giving many more marks to our students over time. So the value of marks has also gone down in much the same way that the value of money has gone down over time. Speak to your parents. I'm sure they'll tell you about how they struggle to score 50, maybe 60% in their school exams, while you guys score 90 marks these days. Delhi University, for example, everybody seems to score 100 on 100. So in much the same way that there is grade inflation, we also have price inflation when it comes to money. That's the simplest possible way to explain what inflation is.
And I think many people here were talking about, just giving it out to the poor people and the poor countries. But that brings in the case of quantitative easing.
So,
No, quantitative
Ayan,
easing is a separate topic. We'll keep that for another day.
yeah, thanks.
Right.
Excuse me?
Thanks. I'll also just add one more question that has shown up a couple of times.
Sure.
And then so request again, please put your questions in the chat. We'll collect them and that way ask Ashish and be able to hear from more of you that way. So Ashish, people have asked, why are different currencies worth different amounts of money?
Excellent question. And the answer to this question was given by a Canadian economist called Robert Mundell. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. In the year 1958, he explained that different countries need to have different currencies because different countries have different economic policies. Simply put, let me ask you this question. If, say, for example, next month there is flooding in the state of Uttarakhand or there is flooding in the state of Kerala, I hope it doesn't happen. I hope it never happens. But imagine that there are floods there. And the Indian government comes and tells you that, hey, you know what? The income tax that your family has paid, this year we are using that money to help the lives of those who have faced problems in Uttarakhand. All of us will say, okay, good, that's what you are there for. That's the job of the government, to make sure that people who are in trouble get the kind of help that they need. And you will wonder why the government is telling you this. If the government, however, were to tell you that it is helping the citizens of Pakistan because of floods that took place in Pakistan, then all of us might say, hey, wait a second. Our tax money should be used for our citizens. And this, by the way, is actually what is happening in Europe right now. Citizens of different countries are saying, please don't use our money to help the citizens of other European countries. So precisely because we want to carry out domestic policies, we need domestic currencies. And that's why having different domestic currencies is important. There is more to it than what I've said, but that's a good starting point to answer the question, why do different countries have different currencies? Okay, I'm sure there are lots of more questions. But Siddharth, do you mind if I explain a couple of related points about Gapminder and then we can come back to
Sure, please go ahead. Yeah, I'm happy to continue questions whenever you want. Again, everyone, please put your questions in the chat. We will, I'll collect them together and ask Ashish at the next question and answer session time.
Lovely.
Sir?
So what I've done, yes?
Sir, I didn't still understand inflation in analysis.
Inflation is when you want to purchase something. Say, for example, you want to purchase a cup of tea and you want to purchase this cup of tea by paying money. Okay. If, let's say, for example, all of you are paid 10 rupees to attend this class, you're not going to paid any money to attend this class, but imagine that all of you were given 10 rupees to attend this class. Okay. Then you might imagine that, say, for example, the price of this cup of tea in this classroom, given your ability to pay, might be, say, I don't know, 20 rupees.
20.
Okay, maybe. Let's imagine this. But Jagat, on the other hand, if all of you were paid 10,000 rupees and all of you had the chance to buy a cup of tea, then you might say, hey, all of us have so much money that you're willing to bid more to buy the same cup. So the price of this cup of tea has gone up not because the tea has suddenly become better. The price of this cup of tea has gone up because all of you have so much more money to spend. That's inflation. When you increase the supply of money but don't increase the supply of goods, then more money chases the same amount of goods.
So,
Measuring this is inflation.
okay. So in richer countries there would be more inflation and in poor countries there wouldn't be?
No, not necessarily. So in fact, being rich and being poor are kind of related to inflation, but not exclusively. There are examples of rich countries that have had high inflation. In fact, America is a good example right now. There are examples of poor countries that have had low inflation. So no, inflation in and of itself is not a good predictor for whether a country will be rich or poor.
Oh, then how does it happen?
Sir,
Yeah, so we've already answered a couple of questions about inflation. I will come back if time permits and answer other questions about inflation. But for the minute, I want to show you the story of India using Gapminder. So let me finish this and then we'll deal with questions. Make sense? Okay, so what I've done through the process of the deselection tool over here is I've hidden all the other countries. Okay, and we are now taking a look at only India over time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play out the story of India beginning in the year 1800. In India, in the year 1800, had a per person income of $1,480 and had a life expectancy, this is going to sound unbelievable, of only 25.4.
So may I tell why?
Yes, Hiten.
So because Britishers were there and they were like that they want to rule us and they were ruling us harshly. So we were not able to live because of the crisis, and that's why it's only 25.4 years.
Yes and no. The reason I say yes and no is because, as you can see, all countries at that point of time had very low life expectancy, including the British themselves. So it's not because the British were misruling us, they were, but that's not the reason why incomes were so low and life
Excuse
expectancy
me,
was so
sir.
low. Part of the reason was because we had very little technological capability when it comes to medicine.
Sir,
But yes,
also,
Hiten, yes.
sir, also in 1918 or so, like there was very less life expectancy for India because like it suffered huge colonization and like it had to fight wars with the British. So both British and India had low life expectancy compared to the other countries in the world, as they lacked healthcare
Sir,
also.
Yes,
sir,
Shashank.
can I add something?
Sure.
Sir, also back in the 1800s, the medication was not as good, sir.
Absolutely. For all of these reasons and many more reasons, India had very low life expectancy and India had very low GDP per capita. But by the
So,
way,
there
one
is
thing,
another reason also because of taxes that they had to pay to the British.
actually no, and the reason I say actually no is because in the year 1800, it wasn't even technically speaking the British that were ruling us, it was the East India Company. So it was a private company, not the British Raj. If you know your history, you'll remember that Queen Victoria became our empress only in the year 1861, 4 years
Yes, sir.
after the Indian War for Independence. In the year 1800, a large part of India was not yet under the rule of the British. So lots of different factors, as some of you pointed out, the fact that we had relatively poor quality of medicines, healthcare, the fact that we were a poor nation, the fact that a lot of wars were being fought, and a whole host of other things. By the way, one thing you should keep in mind is the fact that a full 224 years ago, the average Indian citizen was richer than a citizen of the Central African Republic is today. You remember how we learned that the citizens of the Central African Republic today have an income of $850? But India back then was richer than the Central African Republic is today. That shows the amount of poverty that exists in Africa today and why working on development is so important. But the other thing that you want to keep in mind for why life expectancy was so low is because we had very high infant mortality rates and child mortality rates. And by the way, this is very easily explained to you. If I were to, I'm not going to ask this question, but if I were to ask the question, how many of you have more than two siblings? That is, how many of you have more than two brothers or sisters? I would expect very few hands to go up. But if I were to ask you how many of your parents have more than two siblings, I will see a few hands going up. And if I were to ask you how many of your grandparents have more than two siblings, all hands will go up. So as it turns out, previous generations tended to have a higher number of children. Why did previous generations tend to have a higher number of children? The truth is actually very simple. Because 200 years ago, we simply didn't know how many children would stay alive. And
So
so life
I just like
expectancy was low. Just one second. Life expectancy was so low, and people responded to this by having a higher number of children. Yes, please go ahead.
no, just wanted to make a quick request, and Ashish, feel free to correct me if you'd like it to be different. We'll let Ashish define the times where he's open to having questions, and otherwise, let's wait until he defines such a time and listen to what he's trying to say.
Absolutely. Thank you, Siddharth. Yes, that'll be much better. I know that all of you have a lot of questions. and I'll stick around for as long as possible to answer them. But for the moment, let me finish the point that I wanted to make. Life expectancy was so low because, as I mentioned, there was very high infant mortality and child mortality. Now let's take a look at how India developed over time. And as you can see, as we move along in the 19th century, barely anything changes. India seems to stay right where it is, and India seems to stay right where it is for most of the 19th century. And in fact, by the year 1900, life expectancy has actually fallen from 25, it has gone down even further to 20. So if anything, British rule, and here one of the points that was raised about British rule is by now actually true. They have made it more difficult for life expectancy to go up over time. Income also has fallen a little bit. And then in the first half of the 20th century, as more and more Indians strive for independence, slowly but surely life expectancy in India went up, but income did not. Then India gained independence, and as you can see, life expectancy and income slowly but surely started to go up. And then post 1991, India became relatively affluent, and today we are at 7,100. This is India's journey over time. This is how India has reached where it is today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one more thing, and then I'm going to stop talking, and I'm only going to answer questions from here on in. I'm going to move the timeline back to the year 1947, there and thereabouts, because that, of course, is where India gained independence. And along with India, at this point of time, I'm going to introduce another country. I'm going to introduce South Korea. So South Korea in the year 1947 was actually marginally poorer than us. As you can see, India had an income of 1330, South Korea had an income of 1310. Marginally poor. Viraj, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. So South Korea was marginally poorer than us. And now let's take a look at how the two countries fared over time. Should we feel good about how remarkably fast India's progress since independence has been? Well, it depends. Yes, it has been remarkably fast, but it could have been faster, and we have so much more to do. If you find yourself asking the question, what did South Korea do that allowed them to grow so rapidly? Or if you're asking the reverse question, what did we do that prevented us from growing as rapidly as South Korea? If you find yourself interested in answering this question, welcome to the world of economics. Now you have no choice but to call yourself an economist because you're asking exactly the same kind of question, excuse me, that people like me ask on a daily basis. What does economists try to do? If we take a look at a picture like this and we ask, what can we do to make India a better place? And that's what economics is. It's always trying to answer the question, how can we make the world a better place for the people who live within it? Answering that question in all of its dimensions is what economics is. All right, and now my favorite part of the class. It is my job to answer as many questions as I can until Siddharth says, all right, now it is time to stop.
Thanks, Ashish. I just unmuted myself. So I'll just share some of the questions that have come up so far, and then we can move on to our questions as they come on. So one question that was asked is, what are the factors that make a country a big economy? We've talked about big economies and small economies, and what makes that happen?
Excellent question. So first and foremost, what makes an economy a big economy is people, us. The Indian economy is going to be big because there's 1.4 billion of us. The Chinese economy is going to be big because there's 1.5 billion of the Chinese people. There's about 400 million Americans, and so on and so forth. So first, a large number of people. But that in and of itself is not a guarantee. You also need large physical infrastructure. You need roads, you need dams, you need ultra mega power plants, you need airports, you need seaports. So physical capital and a large number of people, when you combine these two things together, you are likely to get a big economy. India has a large number of people. We are now beginning to develop serious infrastructural quality, and we still have a long way to go in this regard. The Chinese have excellent infrastructural capacity and have a large number of people. Japan, by the way, and South Korea have the opposite problem. Awesome infrastructure, not enough people. But across the world, the simple answer to the question, how do we think about any economy? Ask, what is the number of people and what is the level of infrastructure? The answer to both of these questions is the answer to the question, what makes a big economy?
Great, thanks, Ashish. Another question was, will the climate change issues affect the trajectory of economy and life expectancy in the long run?
It absolutely will. So I said at the start of today's talk that Siddharth and I might have different answers to this question because I'm an economist and because Siddharth is an ecologist, but I actually share his concerns. I worked for about 5 years in a company called Suzlon, and the work that I did over there has convinced me that we are living on a planet that is living on borrowed time. Will climate change impact the economy? It is already impacting the economy and will have increasingly larger impacts in this current century. So yes, climate change is something that keeps me awake at night. It needs to keep more people awake at night. It doesn't. That's the problem.
There's another question that if everyone had a billion units of their own currency, would money in general lose value?
Yes, it absolutely would. If you take a look at, say, for example, what happened in Spain when the Spanish Armada returned with all that silver from South America, Spain did not. This, by the way, I'm talking about history in around the 15th and the 16th century. So we had Spanish ships that came back from South America with insane amounts of silver and gold. But that did not make Spain rich. Ironically and problematically, it made Spain poorer because of high inflation. Why? Because Spain had the same number of goods that were being produced, but Spain had a very large amount of money chasing the same number of goods. This, by the way, is a very important lesson in economics. It's not money that makes you rich. It's what you're able to buy with the money that makes you rich. So Uncle Scrooge.
In this?
So indirectly, that's the value of the.
Sorry, I lost both questions. So first,
Yeah,
Nidhi,
sorry, we couldn't.
and please raise your hand.
So
Yes, Nidhi.
is inflation good? Or is it bad? Or is it both?
Excellent question to ask, Nidhi. And the best way to answer this question is to think about engine oil in.
Can I answer it?
Okay. Yes, Agastya.
I think it depends upon the way you see it.
No, it doesn't depend upon the way you see it. It depends upon how much there is of it. So the best way to.
But I have another doubt.
So Agastya, we'll
let
just
me
finish the point that we were on, and then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Yeah. So Nidhi, think of it as the level of oil in an engine. No oil in the engine will cause the engine to seize up and the engine won't work. But too much oil in the engine will cause the engine to move sluggishly. Inflation is something like that. You need a little bit of it that makes the economy function well, but too much and it starts being a problem. Does that make sense? So the correct answer, if you ask me, is both. Up to certain levels, great. Beyond certain levels, problematic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nidhi.
No problem.
Next, could I ask? I see Kiara has her hand up. Kiara, could you ask your question?
Yeah. So, sir, as per the pro and con, I say of population, can I just say?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, if many people in India, they earn money, so they also have to give some taxes to the government.
Right.
So the more taxes the government gets, so the more a bit economy rises up. So that's one good quality of population. And so there's also one bad quality that because of the population, there must be too many industries which will harm the society, and because of population, pollution and everything. So, which would be more beneficial, having more population, less population?
Lovely question. Okay, let me answer the first one first. There was an economist called Arthur Laffer. I'm going to spell that name out, Laffer. And what he pointed out is that low levels of taxation are a problem, but ridiculously high levels of taxation are also a problem. All of you can take a look at something known as a Laffer curve. And the basic problem over here is if you set very high levels of taxation, people will say, what's the point of earning money? The government is going to take all of my income. India, by the way, did this. In the 1970s, we had a rate of taxation of, I'm not joking about this, 99.7%, which means if you earned 100 rupees, of that 100 rupees, 99 rupees and 70 paise would be taken by the government. What is the point of spending time and efforts in order to earn 100 rupees if all of it is going to be taken by the government? So, Kiara, too high a tax rate also doesn't make sense. Too low of a tax rate doesn't make sense. You need an appropriate level of taxation. Now, I've cheated a little bit because I've used the word appropriate. I haven't answered the question, how much is the appropriate level of taxation? But the reason I'm cheating is because nobody really knows the answer to this question. Different countries have different appropriate levels of taxation. Okay? And the answer to your second question, when you think about population, is too much population a good thing or a bad thing? Us economists are actually divided on the answer to this question. There's a very famous quote by an economist called Julian Simon who says, brains, not stomachs. And what that means is that you should think of an additional person on this planet as an additional brain on this planet and the ability to generate ideas, not a stomach to be fed alone. So, do you see people as a resource or do you see people as a constraint? Is a worthwhile question to ask. And the answer to this question depends upon where in the world you are. In Japan or South Korea, for example, those governments are struggling because not enough people are being born. But in the state of, say, for example, Uttar Pradesh or Bihar in India, in certain provinces in China, the problem is too many people are being born. So I can't give you a one size fits all answer about whether population or too many people is a good thing or a bad thing. It depends upon where in the world you're located at what point of time.
And it also equally depends on the perspective.
Yeah. And that, by the way, is what the study of demographics is all about.
Yeah. Sir, actually, I'm a debater.
Fantastic. All the best for your next debate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiara. Next, I'd like to ask Ayushman to, you had a question?
Yes, sir. So you told about Spain having when they took silver from USA, the GDP decreased. But before the English invaded in,
yeah.
Yes, before the British came to India, they had 3% of the world's GDP, but after they left from India, they had around 29%.
Yep.
And
That's
so how does
that's because what the British took from India was not just gold and silver, they also took productive capacity from India. So the British economy went up because the British economy did not just choose to loot India of gold and silver, although that also happened, but because the productive capacity of England went up. Spain, on the other hand, came back with the first Spanish Armada. They came back with gold and silver, but with not increased production capacity. Wealth is about the ability to produce, not the ability to buy. The easiest way to explain this to you, Ayushman, is to ask you, what if tomorrow you find yourself on a desert island where nobody else is there, nothing else is there, but you have 3 suitcases with 1 crore rupees each? Are you rich or are you poor?
I'm poor because I don't have any way that I can spend that 1 crore.
Spain was
Yes,
like
exactly.
a country with
You
3
have
crore rupees, but not enough money, or not enough production. And that, Ayushman, is the answer to your question. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anytime.
Thank you all for cooperating and helping this question answer session run smoothly.
Yes.
Next, I think Vihan had his hand up.
Sir, I actually wanted to say something about South African, Central African countries. So the main reason they were all lacking behind was that they had no proper income. It's like they didn't have money, but they also didn't have resources to fulfill their needs. They didn't have money and they didn't have resources. They didn't have the both necessary things needed for living.
Absolutely.
Sir,
Siddharth, I think you meant
Yeah,
the other
I think I
Vihan.
was referring to Vihan Pange.
Correct.
Sorry, confusion.
Sir, I had a question that different countries and different places have different prices, and due to inflation, the prices can either increase or decrease. So, sir, how do we find the actual value of a certain given object, sir?
Excellent question to ask, and the answer to that question partly depends on, in fact, asking another question: value for whom? What I mean by that is, an American in India might find a particular thing valuable, but to an Indian, that might be too expensive or not worth it. So, value is as much dependent upon who is buying a particular thing, but also who is selling it. One. And second, within a particular country, the value depends not necessarily on uh, how much money you wish to pay for it, but what you wish to use the thing for. Economists for the last, I don't know, practically since they started to think about this, have debated the use of the word value and what it really means. So you can turn this into a very deep philosophical discussion. You can turn this into a very quantitative discussion. You can turn this into a very simple matter of fact description of the level of inequality in a country. The simple answer to your question, Vihan, is value is dependent both on who is selling it and who is buying it. And the act of purchasing something determines value.
Thank you,
But
sir.
I hope to be able to answer this question at greater length if we ever meet in person. Yes, Siddharth.
Great. Yeah. Also, just to explain, I know some of you have had your hands up. I'm going to prioritize people who haven't had a chance to ask a question. So apologies if you have multiple questions. I'm going to prioritize people who haven't asked so far. So Vaishnavi, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So I would actually like to ask that if the country has a lot of money but not a great big production capacity, so will it be a rich country or a poor country?
Not just a poor country, but also a poor country with significant social problems. The best example, some of you might have studied this in your history textbooks, is the Weimar Republic in Germany after the First World War. It's a classic example, and I'll tell you a story. I don't know if it is true or not, but why let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? So even if it may not necessarily have been entirely true, it is a good story to help you understand the problem of inflation. So the story of how in the Weimar Republic in the First World War, there was a wheelbarrow full of cash, okay, kept outside somebody's home. The cash wasn't stolen, the wheelbarrow was stolen. So it turns out the cash was becoming so worthless so quickly because of inflation that the wheelbarrow was more useful than the currency notes stuck inside the wheelbarrow. And that to me is a classic example of the kind of question that you just asked. In such a country, money being produced has no impact if you can't buy useful things with the money that is being produced. Remember, wealth is being able to purchase things. Wealth is not money. When you see pictures of Uncle Scrooge diving into his ocean of coins, to me, that is always a poor Uncle Scrooge, not a rich Uncle Scrooge. Because the point of wealth is to be able to use that money to buy things that make you enjoy life, not to have all that money safe and secure with you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Ashish. Next,
So my
Madhuvanti, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Why does population vary in different countries?
Wow. Demographers wish they knew the answer to this question. So we
Can
have
I
in
answer?
Ayushman, right?
Sorry,
Yeah,
but
sure. Okay, no, go ahead. So
So,
that
like,
would
I'm an eighth, and in social sciences, we're learning about population distribution. So, like, demand for a particular type of land is more in some areas. Like, people want to live in areas with fertile soil, which can help in their working capacity and increase the jobs they have available for them. People dislike the places that are too have extreme climate conditions like Antarctica, or maybe let's say some desert or something. People don't live there because they have extreme climate conditions.
Yeah,
that
thanks,
is
Ayushman.
one
That's a
factor.
good. Sorry, over
Yeah.
to you, Ashish. Yeah.
No problem, Siddharth. Please continue.
No, I was just going to say thanks. I wanted to hand it over to Ashish for the
Okay.
rest of the answer to the question.
So Yes, Ayushman, you're right. Geographical factors are a good and often the most important predictor for why populations go up in a particular nation, but that's not necessarily the only reason. The level of education, especially of women, also determines the number of people in a particular country. The age at which marriages typically take place determine the level of population in a particular country. South Korea is a great example of typically fertile agricultural land, but these days they have such low growths of population that they actually worry about there being no South Koreans 3 generations from now. That might seem like a ridiculous thing to say, but I'm quite serious about it. South Korea is facing a major problem of there not being enough people. So it's not just geographical factors, there are a whole host of other factors that determine the growth rate of population. Demography, by the way, is one of the most important subjects you can study in the 21st century. So I hope some of you end up becoming demographers.
Okay, sir.
Thanks for that
Thank
question,
you.
Madhuvanti. Yeah.
Sir, I had a point.
Next, I'd like to ask Anisha. Anisha, would you?
Yes, sir. So basically, my question would be, what would be your definition for a perfect economy? Or for example, if I'm India or any random country and I want a higher economy and I have a big population, so what should I do?
Wow, what a lovely question. I think it'll be difficult to top this question in terms of how to think about the ideal state of economics for a particular nation. So, my dream economy, Anisha, is an economy that hasn't had too much impacts of climate change. We live in an economy where climate change is inevitable, but I hope we've managed successfully the transition to a relatively green economy. One, I dream of an India where we have free healthcare for everybody. If you're an Indian citizen, you should be able to count on world-class provisioning of healthcare, which means your immunizations, your vaccinations, your access to nutrition, your access to hospitals are guaranteed. We guarantee everybody access to basic minimum education. So your schooling should be free and of excellent quality, whether provided by the private sector or by the government. And after this, we live in a society where everybody has the chance to have gainful employment. What citizens do after that should be up to them. So the government's job is to provide world-class healthcare, to provide access to education, to make sure that climate change isn't too much of a factor. And then the government should get out of the way and have the economy function as well as it possibly can on its own 2 feet. If we can make this happen, India will be a wonderful place to stay in. How to get to there is a challenge. That unfortunately, not only I, a lot of people in this country don't yet have the answer to this.
Sir,
But sir,
I love it when I have so many questions that I don't know which one to respond to. What a lovely state of affairs.
sir, I'm actually questioning what you actually want because what happens after that is that you know how everything before humans came along and everything, it was all good. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Maybe. There is, by the way, a wonderful essay written by a guy called Jared Diamond who says that agriculture was humanity's worst mistake. That if we had remained hunter-gatherer societies without any of the development that has happened since the birth of agriculture, the earth would have been a much better place. So, Mihir, you're not the only person to come up with this hypothesis. There are serious anthropologists who say that, hey, agriculture was a big mistake. We should all go back to being hunter-gatherers. I disagree, but it's a story you might want to read more about.
So next, Myra, Samarth, I see your hand is up. Samarth, could you ask us your question?
Yes, sir. What are the factors affecting the purchasing power parity?
Lots of different factors and I hope I'm still sharing my screen. Am I?
No, you're not. You could start it again.
Okay.
I thought everyone could see each other, so I...
Yeah, fair enough.
For a bit.
So this website, and just search for the Big Mac Index, The Economist, is a good way to understand purchasing power parity. What they've done over here is they have asked a very simple question. How much does a Big Mac cost in different countries? For us in India, the Big Mac is the equivalent of the Maharaja Mac. But how much does the Maharaja Mac cost in India? So do we pay the same price across different exchange rates for the same good, which is the biggest burger that McDonald's has to sell? And Samarth, the answer to your question is It depends upon the purchasing power in general within that nation. It depends upon the quality of goods and the kind of goods that are being purchased. It depends upon the level of inflation in that country. It depends upon how the exchange rate of that country is being managed. All of these factors put together have an impact upon the purchasing power parity. The bad news, Samarth, is I've given you about 80% of the answer. There are other factors as well, but getting into those factors will need me to explain certain concepts in economics, so I'm skipping on that part for now. But this
Thank you,
website is a
sir.
good place to start. No problem.
Sir,
I've sent the link to this website in the chat, so you'll all be able to access it there.
Lovely.
Sir, I had a
Next,
point.
Thanks.
sorry, who's speaking? Not able to see you.
Sir, I had a
Hitin.
point.
Hitin.
Hi,
Sir,
Hitin. Could you briefly make your point?
So when I was studying SST in my class, ma'am told us one point that ma'am told us some points like countries like Uruguay, Argentina have a higher percentage than ours in women education. They are like 99.8%, 99.9% having the human education for first to 12th indirectly. And the second point was that we can make higher life expectancy if we use more GDP per capita. For example, we currently use 1.4% of our GDP capita today, and Pakistan uses 1.3% only because of their population. They needed that much only, but we needed a lot more. But to show that we are ahead of Pakistan, so they only did a 1.4. For good hospitality, we need a lot of to 12 to 13%. If we get that much, the life expectancy of the Indians would be a lot higher.
I'm not sure I
I think
understand your point.
what I heard Hitin saying was he was talking about budgetary allocations, saying that if
Okay.
it's about how much healthcare is also a function of how much of your GDP is being spent on healthcare. Sorry,
Oh,
life
right.
expectancy is also a function of those sort of
Healthcare.
budgetary
Right.
allocations.
Correct. If Hitin, your point was that we need to spend more on health, I completely agree. And we also need to spend it better than we are currently spending it. And not just India and Pakistan, quite a few nations in the world, I would argue, don't spend both as much and as well as they should when it comes to health. If that was your point, yes, 100% agree.
I see Myra has her hand up. Myra, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, sir. I have a question. Can economists predict like the future of like what the economy of a country is gonna be?
Yes, we can, and we are often asked to, but that doesn't necessarily mean we will get it right. Nobody can see the future, least of all us economists. So I get asked at least once a day to predict what the stock market will be like tomorrow, what the Indian economy will be like tomorrow. And my favorite way to answer this question is, hey, if I knew the answer to this question, I wouldn't be doing this. I would instead have retired at my beach villa in Goa. If I could see the future, I'd be the most powerful man in the world.
But
So I can
one
predict,
one
but
question I
very,
have is,
yeah.
did you invest in Suzlon?
Did I invest in
Yes, sir.
Suzlon?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I was prevented from investing in Suzlon while I was working in Suzlon, but since then, yes, I have invested in Suzlon.
I have a small doubt.
So when are you getting the villa?
Not soon enough, unfortunately. Alas, I should have invested way more.
So
yes, Agastya.
Yeah.
See, what did South Korea do to like grow ahead of us? Like, even though we have a higher population, and I think we have a higher tax rate than South Korea, I think.
They did what is known as industrial policy way better than not just India, but many other countries in the world. Now, how they did it, how they were able to do it, how they stopped doing what they did are fantastic questions. Lots of different books have been written on it. But search for the industrial policy of South Korea and you'll find a fair few references online.
Okay, but which is the country which has the highest development rate?
That's a tricky question to answer because it depends on how you define the development rate. It can be a
Let
function
me
of health.
guess. It's UAE.
UAE does fairly well, but does fairly poorly on some indicators of development.
Okay, thank you for answering my doubt.
No problem.
Then I see that Vyom has had his hand up for a while, and I think we'll continue for about another 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes,
Vyom?
so
Yes.
Go ahead,
my
Vyom.
question was that if what is there the chance of winning a war? Is it good enough to actually go to war with a country for increasing the economy?
The best way to answer your question is to ask you to look up a phrase called Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic. And what that means is that you may well have won, but you have ended up destroying yourself in the process. Our own Mahabharata is a good way to understand this concept. Who really won the war of Kurukshetra? You might say that the Pandavas, technically speaking, won, but their side also suffered so many losses that it really was a hollow victory in some ways. So winning a war comes at the expense of a loss of life on your side as well. And so I would argue as much as possible, if you value life in general, avoiding war is a good idea because winning it might actually end up becoming a very expensive thing. UK at the end of the Second World War is a classic example. They technically speaking won the Second World War, but they became so weak at the end of it that they had no choice but to give up on their empire. So it's tricky to define what a victory is in a war in the first place.
Okay, thank you, sir.
No problem.
Thanks, Vyom. Then Ishan, I see, sorry, Twesha's hand has been up for a much longer time, so I'll just ask Twesha to unmute herself and ask her question.
So my question is that if economy is better with healthcare being more accessible, then why in like some countries like America is the unhealthier version of food and everything like cheaper than eating healthy and having a healthy lifestyle?
Excellent question, and not just in America. A lot of countries in the world, our own country included, I would argue, don't focus as much as they should on what they are eating. America, worryingly, is an economy that is, for the last generation at least, has had lower life expectancy for its younger people than its older people. So they're eating
America
such.
eats an average of 10 acres of pizza every day. I'm not even kidding.
And there are lots of statistics such as this. So, Tuisha, I completely agree with you. And again, not just America, although they are a classic example of dietary practices being taken to ridiculous extremes. But all of us on this planet could choose to eat a little bit healthier, myself included. But yeah, figuring out how to avoid modern foods, some of which are quite harmful, is a challenge that we should all be paying more attention to. 100% agree.
Thanks, Twesha. Ishan, I see you had a question.
So if our economy had opened up much before 1991, would we have been in a much better place than we are right now?
My answer to this question is definitely yes. We should have liberalized much faster than only in the year 1991. One of the things that is important to understand in economics is the concept of opportunity costs. So, the economic reforms of 1991 have come at two costs. One, we have had a degradation of our environment, and second, inequality has gone up. So, even 1991 isn't only good news, it has also come with two major problems. But that being said, we are definitively in a much richer economy and much better economy along certain dimensions. And yes, it should have happened earlier. But also, that being said, it is important to say that we should have also focused more on effective redistribution and much more on the climate than we have so far. But with those two concerns in mind, yes, liberalization should have taken place earlier.
Thank you so much, sir.
Anytime.
Great. And then there's one question that was there in the chat from Sunidhi asking, if all the world had only one economy, would it make this place better or worse?
If we could have had only one economy, then the world would have been a better place. The problem is many people in the world don't agree with there being only one economy. We are divided by a whole host of different factors, by our nationalities, by our religion, by our gender, by our castes, by a whole host of different issues. So if you want to have one economy, we also need to have unification along so many other dimensions. Making that happen is quite challenging, not just for economists, but for all of us on this planet.
Sir, here I got one more point.
Sure, go ahead.
Sir, so one of the areas in UAE, Kuwait, has its own currency known as the Kuwaitian dinar, which is now, I think, almost 280 rupees per Kuwaitian dinar. And it always refuses because it has a lot higher currency than ours, or the normal, because it has the highest currency in the world.
Yep.
Because they have worked a lot hard on that, but we have not worked that hard to get that currency. They have invested in a lot of currencies, like different currencies in a different percentage, like dollar, euro, Canadian dollar, etc., pounds, etc.
Currency and the value of a currency isn't necessarily the strength of an economy. They're two separate things. But we're getting into deeper waters. So we'll skip that part for now.
Great. Nidhi, I see you have your hand raised.
So if everyone had like no one had different opinions, economics wouldn't exist, would it?
What a lovely question. Not just economics, many social sciences as disciplines wouldn't exist if all of us agreed. Then what would we do at conferences if we don't get to yell at each other? So yes, different points of view make our subject a much richer subject to study. Absolutely.
I think not just in conferences, but what will you do at home in the evening?
Indeed, indeed.
Finally, Jagat, I see your hand is up.
Sir, actually, you were talking about economy and everything. But then, who is an economist and what does he do?
An economist is somebody who studies the economy, whether a lot of different countries at the same time, or only one country, or maybe only one firm, or even only one individual, and asks, how can this person, how can this company, how can this sector, how can this country, how can the world get more by giving up lesser? An economist always asks the question, how can we make the world a better place? The simplest definition of an economist is this person is heavily invested, is dedicated his entire profession or her entire profession to making the world a better place along some dimension. And not just economists, to be clear. All social scientists, that's what we try to do. We try to make the world a better place.
Then what is economy?
An economy is the interaction of all of these entities with each other, often but not always using money as a medium of exchange.
Great. And I think we have time for one final question that is there on the chat, and then I will wrap up this session. So Sai Prabir has asked, if colonialism done majorly by Britain and Europe had not occurred, where do you think the world would be today economically?
Lovely. I haven't sent a single message in the chat window, so rather than answer the question, I'm going to give you guys two recommendations. Just give me a second. One is a book called An Era of Darkness by Shashi Tharoor. Now, this book, An Era of Darkness, is a book that is an unrelentingly negative take on the British Empire. As far as Shashi Tharoor is concerned, every single thing that the British did in our country was problematic. And had the British not been there, India would have been a much richer, much more developed, much better off economy, much earlier in time. At the opposite end of the spectrum is a book called Empire by a guy called Niall Ferguson. Some people pronounce his name as Neil Ferguson, however you want to pronounce it. Empire is an aggravating, angering book to read if you're an Indian. So please be warned, because what Neil Ferguson says in Empire is the world would have been a better place if 1776 and 1947 had never taken place. 1776, of course, is when the Americans got independence from the British. 1947 is when we got independence from the British. Neil Ferguson is an apologist for British Empire. He says that the British Empire was a force for the good. Now, my own answer to the question lies somewhere between these two books. I don't think everything the British did was bad in India. Most things that they did were very bad, but they did leave us with some good practices. And while it is true that the British were on balance more harmful than good for India, there were some things that they did that were good for India. So my answer to your question will be to ask you to read both of these books and ask yourself where you fall on the spectrum. Was the British Empire on the whole good for India or bad for India? My own answer is on the whole bad for India, but they did certain good things for us. That would be my answer to this final question.
So I want to I'll wrap up this session now. I see 2 hands have popped up since we had cleared all the hands up, but I just want to finish this wrap up so that in case people want to leave, they can leave. And then if Ashish wants to hang around longer and answer the last 2 questions, we can do
wish I
that
could,
as
but
well.
I have to leave myself.
Yeah, so we'd all have to leave, but I just want to thank you all for coming today. There were a total of 70 people in this session, and it has been from the very start just filled with questions and very interesting questions. And I really want to thank Ashish for taking the time out today to talk to all of us and to engage with all of us so generously, because he's not turned away any question or anyone who has spoken. So thank you so much, Ashish. I just quickly wanted to share the next upcoming events. So on giftedworld.org, you can see, sorry, Zoom just, yeah. On giftedworld.org, you can see our upcoming events on a masterclass by Naveen Kabra on using generative AI usefully. That's exactly 1 week from now. After that, there's a session on the journeys of 3 gifted students from their mouths. And if you want to know more, attend more such sessions by Ashish, in fact, he's a teacher at the GenWise summer program that is happening in May 2024. It's a residential program. You can find details of this on www.genwise.in. Ashish has been a teacher here for many years, and his sessions, his courses have been really loved by students from all over India and all over the world. So this is just the start of the Gifted World platform. We're very excited to have all of you here today, and we're hoping to have more interactions with other mentors and with Ashish in the weeks to come. Thank you all for coming today, and I hope you have a great Saturday evening and Sunday following.
Thanks, Siddharth. If we can have a session where I just get to answer questions, because I'm painfully aware of how many questions we were not able to answer, but I hope we can make this happen once again. Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
There have been a couple of questions about we will share the recording with everyone who signed up for the event. It'll just take us a couple of days to put it together and upload it.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you,
Thank
Siddharth.
you.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye,
Thank you,
sir.
everyone. Feel free to unmute and say bye. It would be lovely to see all of you and say bye.
Yes. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much
Bye.
for this very informative class.
Thank you.
Bye, sir. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish sir.
Excuse me. Hi, I am Sejo, and I was speaking with Aklavya sir today, and he requested me to ask my question on this platform. I wanted to ask about the GenWise program that will be taking place in the summer. So, what all will be covered in the first week of the program? I just wanted to clarify.
So are you asking about Ashish's course or about the GenWise program in
audio
general?
to economics wala course.
Oh, okay. So what we will be doing is we'll be covering the basics of micro and macroeconomics, not necessarily using a textbook approach, but the basic ideas that make up micro and macroeconomics. And then we'll apply these concepts to a whole host of issues, either related to India or different parts of the global economy.
Okay. All right.
Alright.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Anytime.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you. Goodbye. I'll be ending the meeting now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.